We are doing US 301. This is part 1. Remember, this will be published by Thursday. It's around 12 p.m. Thursday, US 220 is getting delayed around 5:15 p.m. US 301 starts from Sarasota, Tampa, Florida for Interstate 75, Baldwin for Interstate 10, Resinger for Interstate 16, Interstate 26 in Orangeburg, Interstate 95 for like multiple times, Interstate 74, US 74 in McDonald, North Carolina. We don't get a mention for Interstate 40, US 64 in Rocky Mountain, North Carolina, Interstate 64 in Richmond. That's where we're going to stop in part 1. We get US 50 for Bow, Maryland, Interstate 97 in Annapolis, Maryland, and we get Delaware Highway 1, where we're going to end. So it's going to be in parts. US 301 begins, so we're getting signed for Bradenton. So we're getting US 41 coming out in August. So we begin on US 301. And we're congruent with US 41, as US 301 is heading into Bradenton as we head to Interstate 75. And we're splitting off with US 41, and we're signed for Ellenton for Interstate 75. We're meeting Interstate 75 for Tampa and Naples. Naples is an alright choice. We should get Miami, Florida. Tampa is a great choice, so we don't know where US 301 will go. It's signed for nothing. We're meeting Interstate 75 once again. We're signed for Brandon, but this should have been Tampa. And we get Ocala. Why? Why are we getting Ocala? This should have been like Tampa or Atlanta. We get Interstate 4 and US 92 for Orlando. Interstate 4 will take you into Tampa, like US 92. We are joining US 98, which we already covered. And now we're splitting off with US 98. So US 301 will head straight. Oh, there it is. We're losing the real US 98, so we're losing it. It is time for Brooksville, and we're signed for Wildwood. We are joining US 41, so which we already covered US 41. And then US 27 is splitting off. It says to Interstate 75. We're losing US 41. It is signed US 441 for Gainesville, and we're signed for Stark for US 301. We're meeting Interstate 10 for Lake City. This should have been like Tallahassee. And then we get Jacksonville for Interstate 10 East. So which we'll do Interstate 10 East on Friday. We're joining US 90. So we're going to be congruent with US 90. And we're splitting off with US 90. So that will be coming out in July 7th. Same as US 80 will come out on July 6th. We're joining US 23. And we just entered into Georgia. We're splitting off with US 301 and 23 and US 1. So it is signed for Waycross for US 1 and 23. So US 23 we'll do in September. And US 301 is signed for Jesup with US 84 and US 25. Here's US 82. That will take you into Waycross. So which we already covered US 82. What is it signed? Brunswick. And we're heading into Jesup to meet US 84 and US 25. And US 25 is joining us. So US 341 is splitting off with US 25, which we already covered. US 341, US 82, and US 25. And we're joining US 84, which we already covered US 84. And we're splitting off with US 84, which we're going to skip the rest of US 25, which we already covered the rest of US 25 video. After meeting US 280 after Claxton and US 80 and US 25 in Statesboro and Interstate 16, so we're going to head into South Carolina. And welcome into South Carolina. In this area, we're about to meet US 278, and US 278 is splitting off with US 301. So we did not cover US 278. We'll be meeting US 321, which we already covered the US highway. After splitting off with US 321, we'll be heading to the next town in South Carolina, but we should stop in Fayetteville. We are joining US 601, so we'll do US 601 that is coming up very soon in July. Here's US 78, which we already covered that video. Here's US 178, which we did not cover. I don't know where the main US 21 is, the US 21 proper. We're meeting Interstate 26 for Columbia and Charleston. Here's US 176, we did not cover. Here's US 15, we did not cover. We will do that in August. And we're about to join on Interstate 95 North for Florence. That's where we're going to stop. It says Savannah, Georgia. You can see Lake Marion over there on Interstate 95 and US 301. Then we're splitting off with US 301 and Interstate 95. And we're splitting off with US 15, so US 301 will head into Florence. We already covered US 522, so we are splitting off with that highway. We're meeting US 378. And we're splitting off with US 378, so US 301 will head into Florence. We're joining US 52. It is time for Charleston, and we're heading to Florence. So we'll do US 52, that is coming up in July. And then we're splitting off with US 52, so US 301 went into Fayetteville. And we're going to stop here. So that is it for part 1 for US 301. It'll be published by Thursday around 12:25 p.m. So, goodbye.